the rebel pilot who flew through the Arc de Triomphe. The humiliation that unleashed madness. Paris, July 14, 1919. France was celebrating its first Bastille Day after victory in the Great War. Thousands of soldiers marched down the Champs-Élysées in the most grandiose parade in French history. Infantry, cavalry, artillery. All the heroes of the war were there. All, except one, the aviators. The parade organizers had decided it was too dangerous to include an aerial demonstration over Paris. The pilots, who had risked their lives every day for 4 years, who had revolutionized modern warfare, who had turned the sky into a battlefield, were excluded from their own victory celebration. Charles Godefroy was furious. This 28-year-old veteran, an aviation ace with multiple aerial victories, couldn't believe the humiliation. He had flown suicide missions over the trenches, had faced the best German pilots, had watched dozens of comrades die, and now they told him that flying over Paris was too risky? That night, while Paris celebrated, Godefroy made a decision that would change aviation history. He would stage his own aerial parade. But it wouldn't be just any demonstration. It would be something so audacious, so impossible, that no one could ever again ignore French aviators. The impossible plan. Godefroy shared his plan with his mechanic, Gaston Chevalier, and with journalist Jacques Mortain, who would later document the entire story. His idea was simple in concept, suicidal in execution. Fly through the Arc de Triomphe. The dimensions were terrifying. The arch had an opening of 29.19 meters high by 14.62 meters wide. His plane, a Newport 11 biplane, had a wingspan of 7.55 meters. Technically it would fit, but the margins of error were microscopic. A gust of wind, a miscalculation, a moment of panic, and he would crash into France's most sacred monument. But there were more complications. The Arc de Triomphe is located in the center of Place Charles de Gaulle, then Place de l'Étoile, where 12 avenues converge. The surrounding buildings create unpredictable air currents. To complicate matters further, Godefroy would have to fly extremely low over the Champs-Élysées to align correctly, risking collision with trees or buildings. His friends thought him mad. Even other veteran pilots told him it was impossible. But Godefroy had made his decision. The Flight of Revenge. August 7, 1919, 7:30 in the morning. Paris was awakening peacefully when the roar of an aircraft engine shattered the morning silence. Godefroy had taken off from Villacoublay Aerodrome in his Newport 11, with the inscription FSAB on the fuselage. He flew low over the city, so low that Parisians could clearly see the pilot in the open cockpit. He followed the course of the Seine until reaching the Champs-Élysées, where he descended even further. Passers-by stopped in amazement at seeing a warplane flying between the trees of the world's most famous avenue. Godefroy had one chance. There was no margin for a second attempt. He aligned perfectly with the Arc de Triomphe, calculated speed, height, angle of approach. Haussmann's buildings passed like a blur on both sides. And then it happened. At 7:35 in the morning, Charles Godefroy became the first and only pilot to deliberately fly through the Arc de Triomphe. The small World War I biplane pierced through the Napoleonic monument like a bullet, in an image that defies all logic and sanity. Strategically positioned photographers captured the exact moment. The images are surreal. A fragile plane of fabric and wood floating in the center of the massive stone arch, as if history itself had decided to play a cosmic joke. The reaction, between arrest and glory. The reaction was immediate and contradictory. Officially, the authorities were furious. Godefroy had violated all flight regulations, had endangered a national monument, had caused panic in the streets. They arrested him immediately after landing. The trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors accused him of dangerous flight over prohibited urban zone, endangering public safety, and potential vandalism against historic monument. They demanded a severe fine and prison, but something strange happened during the process. The witnesses, instead of condemning Godefroy, began to praise him. The Parisians who had witnessed the flight described the excitement, the technical perfection, the sublime audacity of the moment. The newspapers, initially critical, began to change their tone. Godefroy's defense was brilliant in its simplicity. He had done what the parade organizers said was impossible. He had demonstrated that French aviators not only deserved respect, but admiration. His protest had damaged nothing and hurt no one. It had been an act of pure art, a moment of impossible beauty. The verdict, poetic justice. The court found itself in an impossible position. Technically, Godefroy was guilty of everything he was accused of. But morally, he had done something that all of France secretly admired. He had converted his protest into poetry, his rebellion into national glory. The sentence was a perfect compromise. Godefroy was found guilty and sentenced to pay a symbolic fine of 10 francs, approximately $50 today. No prison, no dishonor. It was the most famous fine in aviation history. But true justice came afterward. Godefroy became an instant legend. His feat was celebrated in newspapers around the world. He received offers for air shows, commercial aviation contracts, even Hollywood proposals. More importantly, his protests worked. Aviators were never again excluded from official ceremonies. French aviation had won the respect it deserved, thanks to an act of rebellion so perfectly executed that it became art. The legacy of the impossible flight. Charles Godefroy died in 1924, just 5 years after his feat, in an aviation accident during an exhibition. He was only 33 years old. But his legacy endured. His flight through the Arc de Triomphe remains unique in history. Other pilots attempted it later, but all failed, some dying in the attempt. The perfect combination of technical skill, atmospheric conditions, audacity, and luck that Godefroy achieved was never repeated. Photographs of his feat are displayed today in the Aviation Museum at Le Bourget. The Arc de Triomphe includes a small plaque mentioning the flight as part of its history. And every year, on the anniversary, some veteran aviators place flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier, remembering the rebel pilot who flew for the honor of all. The story of Charles Godefroy demonstrates that sometimes the most effective protest is not the loudest, but the most beautiful. His 3-second flight through the Arc de Triomphe achieved more for aviator dignity than decades of official complaints. In an era when bureaucracy wanted to reduce war pilots to statistics, Godefroy responded with an act of pure aerial poetry. He converted his humiliation into glory, his frustration into legend, his protest into one of the most iconic images in aviation history. And all for a fine of 10 francs.